Hello and welcome to the Hmong Women podcast. My name is Emily.
I'm Ariel.
And I'm Dochi.
And today we're going to be talking about a topic, but before I introduce it, I want to do a trigger warning. We will be talking about a very serious issue that does mention violence, assault, the R word, and possibly homicide. So if it's something that you don't want to listen to just because it's triggering, please feel free to turn off the podcast. Otherwise, if you're good, feel free to join us. We will be talking about just violence against women in society, but also specifically in the Hmong community. And I want to just hold space for anyone who, after hearing that, has decided, yeah, this topic's not for me. I'm going to dip out. Totally fine. We will have some resources in the description for if you are someone or you know someone who is currently in a situation that they want to get out of. Feel free to access those resources. But let's get started. I think that violence against women is a big fucking issue in our community as Hmong people, but also just in society in general. And I can pull up a bunch of TikTok examples just in the past week that I've seen. What have you seen? Because you're agreeing.
Oh, no. I want to hear the TikTok
You want to hear what
videos. Yeah.
Okay. Because I want to hear what you have if you've also seen any, and you too. But I think one that we all know is the man versus bear argument.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not going to talk about the man versus bear argument. I'm going to talk about the comments in the man versus bear. So a lot of the comments that I see in those videos are specifically men starting with, if I were to kill you, or if I were to R-word you, or you're too ugly to even be killed or R-worded by me. Just the fact that their statements start with violence on an online platform says a lot to me already about where their mindset is at. But that kind of violent energy on the internet is already very unsafe for women and young girls. But I don't know if you guys heard about this. There was a doctor who tried to murder his wife in Hawaii by pushing her off a hiking trail instead of divorcing her.
I did hear about that, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So he's been sentenced in jail, thank goodness. But why didn't you just divorce her? And the first thought was, it'd be easier to kill my wife.
The money.
You're right.
Yeah.
Insurance. That's the whole Chris Watts vibe, right?
Mm-hmm.
He killed his daughters and his wife instead of just leaving them for his mistress.
Mm-hmm.
There was, I mentioned this to you, a Belgian gynecologist who was found guilty of assaulting a lot of his patients, but he was not sentenced to any jail time because the judge said that it would ruin his career. Sound familiar to Brock Turner?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the U of M kid?
Not the U of M kid, the one in California where he raped a girl behind a dumpster. He was a swimmer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was California?
I believe that's California.
Oh.
Yeah, not U of M.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There was a girl in Italy who was stabbed 75 times by an ex-boyfriend. That was trending all over TikTok too, just yesterday that I saw. I don't know if you guys heard of the Korean celebrity who recently passed away, Kim Se-dong.
Yes.
Yeah, so she was known to have dated, alleged, okay, we don't need to be sued up in here. It's true though. I have no money. She was alleged to have been dating a really well-known Korean actor who was the highest paid Korean actor in South Korea. And he was no, I never dated her. But that's alleged, and there's been evidence presented that he started dating her at the young age of 15 and he was 27. And
shame on him.
Yeah, she unfortunately, is on the other side now. She's resting in peace. But she did commit suicide because of all the things that was happening to her. And then I just heard this yesterday. One more TikTok thing, and tell me what you guys think about this, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a video game on Steam, which is actually no longer available for new purchases, but it's still available for people who bought it. It's called No Mercy. And I'm going to read you guys the description and tell me, I'm going to clip just your two raw reaction while I'm reading this, okay?
Mm-hmm.
No Mercy is a 3D choice-driven adult visual novel with a huge focus on incest and male domination. After your mother's affair shatters your family, you take on a new role, not to fix what's broken, but to claim her for yourself. Unveil her deepest secrets, subdue her, and make all women yours.
Okay, who's
Yeah.
nasty ass mind wrote this? He needs an
When did this come out?
evaluation.
So it's a game.
When did it come out?
I think it was this year, beginning of this year, 23 or 24. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's no longer available.
Mm-hmm.
And except unless you've already purchased it, then it's still available. Disgusting.
That is
Who the
so
hell would
scary.
Purchase that.
A lot of people, surprisingly.
That's even scarier.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
And yeah, its focus is on incest and male domination and sexual assault. And, you know, I don't know if you guys have purchased games from Steam, but some of them like obviously have the rating of like, are you 18 years or older? And like, there's a way to bypass that on Steam because I have Steam. And I just can't imagine like how many young boys purchased that game.
Mm-hmm.
But that's been trending on TikTok, and I thought that it was fake, but I looked it up, and it's a real game.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's so scary.
exactly. And that leads into, I don't know if you guys watched the Netflix series Adolescence.
It's on my watch list.
It's good.
Oh, I did.
Yeah, oh yeah, you did. Okay, it's intense,
Uh-huh.
but it's good because I'm not going to spoil it for you, but if you read the description, like it talks about the importance of understanding like adolescent internet activity and how red pill content can affect teenage boys.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so it does a really good job of portraying the different emotions and perspectives. But I just think in just like that short amount of time of like TikTok trends,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that very much reflect real life instances, it's terrifying how prevalent violence against women is.
Mm-hmm.
And not just women, but young girls. And so it is a big issue. And I'm not even talking like current policies or past policies that have happened that attack women. I haven't even pulled out like statistical numbers about like how many women and young girls are affected by violence. And like these examples don't even touch on so many other different acts of violence and hatred towards women and young girls. But yeah, it's like pretty prevalent. And I'm not even talking about just within the Hmong community either. This is like
Mm-hmm.
just across the board. But yeah. So I wanted to do that quick overview for the two of you and pass it on to the two of you. And what are your thoughts? Well, how do you see it being presented in the world right now and in our communities?
I would say yes, I agree with you. It's definitely an issue, not just within our community, but globally. I do not look at it or look at a lot of articles globally, and I honestly, when I'm on TikTok, it's really I'm just making a reel on there. And my algorithm doesn't really show me all of that, so I didn't see all of that. I did see the one about the Korean girl on my Facebook feed, and recently I saw this was a very brief video clip of a Hmong girl, and she's like young, 15-ish, and she's being forced into a marriage, and she clearly does not want to go. And this was very recently.
Numaji.
No, não te imagina. She's at her home, and so this is just a clip of what's going on, but you can just see her. She's in her home, and this guy who's of age is there to toyonu, and her mom is even pulling and tugging her. Achimukia. And she's like, no, like, and she's crying. She's holding on to like the posts in the house, and she's like fighting to like stay.
I've seen that.
And I was like, it's just
Look, I saved
so
it,
goddamn heartbreaking that not only is that an issue in itself, that this guy is already so much older and she clearly doesn't want to be in this, but then there are people, including her mother, who's supporting this on her. So that was something I saw recently. That was very like, I just don't understand, you know,
Yeah.
I guess the concept behind it, the reasoning why behind it, but I think that's something I will never understand. But as I mentioned, I think violence against women is definitely a global issue. Speaking directly to our Hmong community, to the fellow brothers, sisters, family members out there, I think there's definitely a lot that we can do to impact this space more positively within our own homes, and the only way to do that is to have the conversation. I think this conversation is still an elephant in the room where nobody really wants to talk about it. Nobody actually wants to focus on it because of how heavy the subject is and because of how common actually it is in our homes. And it's better to brush away and pretend like it's not there.
But you said you saw the video.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it was sad. It reminds me of the film that I recently watched, Children Under the Mist.
Yeah.
Yeah. I watched that a couple days ago with my boyfriend, and to him it was very much of a culture shock, but to me it was like, this is the most extreme version of bride kidnapping, which is also violence against women in its purest form. So me personally watching that, I think for the majority of it, like, I was very calm, but I think near the end where you watch the last 10-15 minutes, it is very like heartbreaking to see someone being dragged against their free will and then also being manipulated and also trying to coerce her to do something that she clearly doesn't. I mean, she even goes so far to the fact of like hiding in a school too. And her mom comes and tries to get her. And then her mom is like, oh, you know, like, I don't want to be embarrassed. And like, she shouldn't be here. I'm just going to take her home. Nothing's going to happen to her. But her mom is also a very big like person in this story who, in my opinion, is being taught not to embarrass her family. So I think there are a lot of role dynamics and also a lot of films that we can talk about in terms of women's violence and bride kidnapping. But yes, violence against women is a global issue. I mean, I don't think we have to debate that. Globally, I wanted to zone in a little bit more on Hmong people. And so I actually looked up just some, I didn't go the social media route, but I went down the news outlet route.
Yeah.
And so in 2021, there was actually someone by the name of Cindy Vang, California, and she was actually a mother of 6 who was murdered by her husband. And also in 2022 in St. Paul, Minnesota, there were 2 people by the names of Kalor and Yia Shong. And Yia Shong actually shot his wife in his home and then killed himself. And so he had actually shot his own wife for turning the gun on himself. And while their 5 young kids, all under the age of 10, were in the home. So I feel like news cases like this, like, it's nothing new, you know? Like, it's always been very prevalent in our community, and something does need to change. I actually went down the rabbit hole and I was like, well, I want to know exactly like how many Hmong people are actually being affected. So I don't know if you girls have that, but I just have a few statistics on that. So just diving right in, I pulled this off, and I'll leave the citations. I'll send it to Emily to include in the description. But essentially, this is from Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence fact sheet. This was in 2019, which is a couple years old, but it's not 10 years old. But it's a fact sheet on domestic and family violence in Hmong communities. And so in it, if you look it up, it's very descriptive, which I really liked. But one of the things that stood out is that in a survey of 425 Asian women who responded to the statewide Minnesota Asian Women's Health Survey, 20% of the respondents were Hmong, of all the 425 men. 8% of those 425 had experienced emotional, physical, and sexual abuse from a partner within the last year. 15% had experienced such abuse in their lifetime. 5% had experienced emotional, physical, and sexual abuse by someone other than their partner within the last year. 12% had experienced such abuse in their lifetime. Of the women who experienced the violence, 11% reported the incident to the police. 41% believed that about half of the men in their community hit their wives. Participants reported that 26% of partners who are aware of domestic violence laws frequently controlled the relationship. In comparison, 7% of partners who are not aware of domestic violence laws frequently controlled this relationship. So, just putting those stats out there, that there are more that we can probably cover, but I mean, it's a very prevalent thing. So, yeah.
I have that same topic actually lined out here too, is Violence and abuse is often underreported anyways, generally, and especially within our Hmong community, which you had already listed the stats. Like that's just what's reported. But what goes underreported, I think it becomes the result of those examples. And I have a few here as well, in addition to Kalor and Sinibing. But the domestic violence against Hmong women is so often underreported due to our cultural values, which emphasizes obedience to men. And it's the fear of shaming the family and the reluctance to seek help outside of our community. And that huge wall and barrier is so strong in our community that I think it continues to leave us in this cycle where it happens so often. To add on to those examples you had earlier, Ariel, I have here Payao Bang, 2024, Dakota County, Minnesota. She was 27-year-old, fatally shot by her 65-year-old husband. He was Mika person, Smith Brown, and then he died by suicide. So it was a murder-suicide. And Jennifer Yang of 2023, Andover. Jennifer, a 36-year-old mother of 3, was killed by her partner in a murder-suicide. And aside from that one, Bao Yang and Dao Lao, a 41-year-old mother killed by her former boyfriend, who then died by suicide in a case investigated. And this part was, I would say this is fairly common in these stories, is that court documents revealed a prior history of abuse by Yang, highlighted the challenges victims of a domestic violence face, including community pressures and fears. It's the fact that there is literally a rap sheet. There's documentation that this is an ongoing cycle, and it's that she did seek for help, but yet this is the ending. And these cases, they're mothers. I don't know, it's the lack of consideration from that person that this is a human being that we're taking away. And it's so tiring to always hear well, what did she do wrong? And in some cases, they're like, well, she was talking to someone though. And it's like, well, that's not actually the point of the story here. It's the fact that somebody killed someone because they couldn't control their own emotions. And the last one I have here is of Zhang Vang, Fresno, California. She's 33, mother of 7, killed by her estranged husband. She was allegedly in an arranged marriage at a young age and had suffered abuse for years. And I list and highlight these to add in addition to what Ariel had already listed for us, because I think these examples, again, goes to show how often it happens in the community, and it's much too similar. It's one story after another. And again, I think it really goes back to what we have built in our community. It's the mindset we have. Let's not report our son because it's our son. You have to learn how to hold these people accountable so that we don't continue this cycle with our next generation. If you let this one person go, who's to say that this next generation is not going to think the same way? Well, dad used to beat up mom, so I can do the same thing to my wife too. There's really no accountability is my point. And I did just want to add this one piece that I found from the Violence Policy Center, and that's an organization founded in 1988. They provide national education that works to stop gun deaths and injury through research, education, advocacy, and collaboration. And through there, I found stated here, and I quote, medical studies estimate that between 1,000 and 1,500 deaths per year in the United States are the result of murder-suicide. And with that being said, 65% of all murder-suicides, 65%, involve an intimate partner. Of these, 95% were females killed by their intimate partner. 95%.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, the reason why there's always such a long rap sheet, to Dochi's point, is the fact that on average, it takes a woman at least 7 times to be able to leave an abusive relationship. And so that's why typically you see in these cases that there's a long rap sheet, because abuse isn't just physical, it's emotional, it's mental. And so a lot of women are manipulated to feel like they're safer with their abuser than if they were to leave, which is why it takes so many times on average for a woman to be able to leave.
Well, I think one of the things that I thought about automatically in terms of violence against women is prioritizing someone's safety first. So getting them to a safe space and making sure they get the care and attention they deserve. Um, because I think a lot of times, like, we tell women, you need to be resilient, you need to push through, you need to save face, things will get better. And I feel like that just gets overused, because me personally, like, I've viewed in several family interactions where, the old ladies are like whispering to themselves, like, oh, did you hear, she got hit, da da da. And then they'll talk about the drama, but not do anything about it. So I think a big portion of our community does need to learn how to step up. And better yet, instead of talking and gossiping about it, actually do something different about it. Another thing too is gaslighting people. So stop telling people, like, have you talked to them? What's your part in this? Like, you must have done something. Like, in severe cases like rape, sexual assault, domestic violence, like, it's the shame, it's the blame, it's the guilt laid out by the society for the failure of women, essentially. And so that's so ingrained in us that we think, I mean, I don't think it's normal, but some people think it's normal to label someone else as like damaged goods or, someone who's lesser of if you experience that. So I do think we do need to take a step back as a community and understand how we can fix this and do different moving forward. Another big thing too, and I've actually done it with my siblings, is teaching what violence is to our younger generation and also advocating for that, right? Because if we teach the next generation how to act differently and what they should and shouldn't be doing, I feel like that would play a huge ripple effect in how violence and DV and everything else is looked at. So, I mean, I think there are instances in my personal life where, I do see men and women are treated differently. Like, I grew up being treated differently as my brother, and I acknowledge that. Am I still a little bit petty about it? Sometimes. But I think the bigger part of me realizes that that is all a part of a bigger system, right? A system of beliefs, a system of culture, a system of, like, just everything, traditions. And so when you actually look at it from a bird's eye sort of view, you recognize that, like, my parents did this because of this, but at the same time, I don't have to follow in those same exact footsteps and I can choose different. So I think really starting kids young and teaching them how to respect other people, having moral ground, having those actual standards in all of their relationships would change the world for the better. Yeah. So I'll leave it there because I know that was a lot, but just a little bit of what I think could, what we could do better.
Yeah, it's not a lot. I think that it's a perfect amount. And they do say that it takes 3 generations to unlearn a pattern, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're at that 3-generation timeline. Mm-hmm. And we are teaching, like you said, we're teaching people and our young ones to not hold the same values and mindsets that we did.
Yeah.
So
obviously the elders play a huge role in this. And I want to say that I'm barely optimistic as in general. But I guess my focus is no longer, not at all on the elders, but I truly feel like we are the adults now and we get to rewrite that. And it's going to take a lot of work, 100%, because we are a part of that, like in the middle of we've seen it, we're just so done with it and we no longer want it to be a continuation of our future for our kids and the following generations. When I say that I've seen it before, I've never personally experienced physical abuse from my partner. But one thing that I really appreciated in my divorce process was the support of my dad. That alone gives you strength that I think is unimaginable, because I already understood the perspectives of the general community, and that weighed heavily on my decision, unfortunately, on what I wanted to do to move forward. Now, I can't imagine if it was abuse involved with cheating. And I had that mindset. And if my dad was not supportive of me, granted, my dad was supported and I still stayed for 3 years. And that's not something I'm proud to say, but it is something that I have to share, because I think that if those layers were there as well, I know that there are so many women in the community who have all those layers, with also the perception of what the community is going to say to them. And so it seems easier to just, you know what, I've already dealt with it for so many years. A couple more years is not that bad. He'll change. It'll be better. But the fact is that it's never better. And I know that in my case, the support of my dad was just, it was very simplistic. It's, you know, I don't feel like I had to really reason too much. It was that, hey, this is what happened and I can't do it anymore. And he was just supportive. That was it. It was the simplicities of, I would rather you not come back in a coffin, you know, so I'm happy if you are. And that's not something that I would say the entire community is privileged to. And that's something I'm very happy about and very proud to say of my dad. The other piece here is, I think there's a lot of difficulties in trying to tell elders what to do. So that is something I do stay away from. I think that because, and I say that because I truly feel it becomes a waste of breath, time, and energy. Not that I don't think it's important to have conversations with them. I just think that it's hard to tell them, stop doing this, stop doing that. Like my mom and I go through that on simple things, okay? And on these bigger matters, I've realized that concepts that don't penetrate the brain just doesn't. I like to want to focus on those who do understand the concepts. I think there's a good amount of us out here who are capable of understanding that it's not the woman's fault in these situations, and also being able to step up in those situations. I know it's not easy for everyone to do that, but to speak up, as Ariel said, like women will whisper about it in corners, but never actually truly speak up in situations. If there's no one backing up our own like sisters, who the hell is going to back us up? The other thing that I did want to share, and I'm sorry I'm going on such a rant here, in a current situation right now, I know that I know someone who has committed just terrible acts of violence towards their partner. It's that us as a community and our elders are so much more accepting of someone who's coming out of jail as opposed to a divorced fucking woman. And it blows my fucking mind. I come out as a divorced fucking woman because my man cheated, and I get side eyes, I get shunned. I'm sitting in a corner with people whispering about me and shit. But somebody comes out of jail
And they're welcomed back with open arms.
and it's a, hey buddy, how you doing? Like nothing happened. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, like what universe are we living in that shit is so backwards? So yes, I do feel very passionate about this because, as Emily had already mentioned, abuse is not just physical. There's so many different forms of abuse, and our community in general abuses our women based on our actions. Mm-hmm. The fact that a woman can be shunned because she chose to walk away from an abusive relationship and so like, oh, don't talk to her. But it's so okay for you guys to talk to someone's son who literally just got out from shooting up a house. Like, make it make sense is all I'm saying. Just make it make sense. Really evaluate who you are choosing to connect with, to talk with, to accept, to invite over. And yeah, I know there's going to be people out there protecting. People can change. Yeah, okay. Well, we'll see when they change. I'll see you and I'll talk to you when you change. But at this moment, I'm not just going to give you an open door just because you could potentially change. But yesterday ago, you just shot up someone. Like, that's a no for me. And I really think you should reevaluate yourself, your priorities, and your values if you are that kind of person.
Yeah, I think to both of your points, you both make really good points about effective ways to combat how we carry on these thoughts about violence, right? And so Ariel's coming at it from I'm having a conversation with my siblings, the younger generation, about the importance of understanding what violence is and how we can prevent it. And Dochi's coming from a really good point of view of like, okay, here's who we can talk to amongst our peers about how we can prevent it. And to expand on that, right? Your point and my point about elders is we are the elders now, which is why I say it's important to talk to your elders about the importance of combating violence against women. Because I mean, we have people who are a little bit older than us in their 30s and 40s who are now the elders. They're being called to the tables and they have the opportunity to sit there and go, oh, Zinza, I don't think that's right. And so those people who have that kind of opportunity, that kind of privilege needs to be the one that says it. But I think the underlying message too that I think we can address is like the closed-mindedness, right? You can sit here and be like, I'm teaching the younger generation, but if they're closed-minded about it, there's no way to change that. And so that brings me to like my next point. And Ariel, you mentioned that you have a couple of additional points and examples of violence against women too that you wanted to share.
Sure. Yeah. Well, there are a couple things that I noted too while just doing my research that obviously, as we've touched on before, there are different types of violence. For me, the ones I'll be focusing on is domestic violence, verbal, sexual, bride kidnapping. So when I step back and look at domestic violence, I have never experienced that myself, but other people, in my life have. And abusive behavior through my eyes has been so ingrained into the normalcy of our lives that sometimes it's a little scary, I do feel like a lot of people feel more comfortable talking about it behind closed doors versus actually stopping it in its tracks. And sometimes people just say, oh, that's just the way it is. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate with me in that of like being confused in that moment and sort of semi-rejecting that idea, but then also trying to haggle with like what my role is, right? So I feel that part. And then I think another thing that came up for me was that in terms of domestic violence, I do feel like children can often be used as an excuse as well. So a lot of people say you should stay for the kids, you should think about your marriage, you should have all kids should have both parents in the household. So they use children as an excuse to hold down women who are stuck in abusive relationships. Another thing too is I feel like there's a really heavy, what's the right word? Like there's a need to protect men, right? Even though men hold a lot of the privilege in our community. So for example, when something goes wrong, you want to make sure to protect your husband's reputation, right? So the being patient, the oshinde, considering your family image, being forced to go back, feeling that embarrassment, feeling that shame, that's a lot of what folks experience when they're trying to get out of an abusive relationship, but they can't because a lot of people are telling them otherwise. So I just thought I'd bring that up. Verbal abuse as well, so verbal abuse I think is really prevalent in our community as well, because in my family too, like a lot of people lack accountability and also a lot of people lack the ability to like apologize. And so for me, I've seen it in instances too where people get riled up at family events and then they'll say things they don't mean and then they just never apologize for it. And it'll be so hurtful to the fact where like people just stop talking, like they just cut themselves out. And honestly, it's sad to say, but like people do experience that. And like I've also seen that happen, in other friends' lives and other families' lives too. So just putting that out there. And then bride kidnapping as well. I don't think people see that as violence, but I think that's one of the things that came up for me when I was thinking of this is because bride kidnapping is basically where, a woman or a female is taken against her will and forced to marry. And that's actually considered violence against women by international human rights standards. So just putting that out there that violence is the unlawful exercise of physical force or intimidation by the inhibition of such force. So it's basically violating someone's fundamental rights and bodily autonomy and their freedom. And so in the Hmong community and other places where similar practices exist, there can be complexities where people may agree to elope, but they have to make it look as kidnapping. And on the other hand, people are being kidnapped against their will. So I think what it boils down to, it really is just consent versus being coerced, traumatic, and violent, right? So someone has to give their free will in order to get married. And so I know this doesn't happen in just the Hmong culture because there's other cultures that this happens into, but it is actually really harmful, and it's rooted in our cultural traditions and how we see our customs and how we see people getting married. So just putting that out there.
I think the underlying message from what I'm hearing from the three of us is that the consistent responsibility is placed on women to uphold the family, to maintain the family, and then to fix the family. Even though acts of violence and acts of irresponsibility come from the men. And what needs to happen is that shift of responsibility from women to men, that they need to be held accountable and responsible for their actions, how they broke apart a family, and how they plan on mending it if that is the choice of the woman who was the victim. And I think a big part, too, is, right, children has been mentioned throughout the entire conversation, is people don't understand that children who are exposed to violence are, I believe the statistic is 5 times more likely to then become involved in violent acts themselves. And so we often disregard children in situations of violence, whether it's witnessing a bride napping, witnessing a domestic violence incident, witnessing a meeting, witnessing or experiencing verbal abuse, that they're children, that they won't be able to understand. But they do, unfortunately. And sadly, children understand exactly what's happening. And when they don't get closure, when they don't get the chance to see true responsibility, they're more likely to get involved in that kind of situation themselves or be the person that acts in that way. And so thanks for sharing those additional situations, but also thank you for sharing your, divorce journey. I think the overall underlying message that I think can be used across any culture, any societal form is that responsibility should no longer just fall on women to educate society about how violence affects them. At this point, there's enough information out there for men to step up and take the lead and take the responsibility and say, you're right, this is an issue with our gender and our sex specifically. How can we do better? And then in the Hmong community, it's, okay, here's historically how we've done these acts of violence, whether it's or how we do these cultural talks. It's how can we ensure that when we are working with people our age or younger generation, that this doesn't continue? How can we make sure that it's no longer embedded in our cultural practices and that we're not just whispering behind closed doors at a party about how, mando, and that's it. So I think that there's a lot that we can do better as a community. And I think the biggest conversation or question to ask our audience is, what have you observed that you feel would help with this conversation of ending gender-based violence and improving relationships between, communities where, especially our community is very much a community that has faced a lot of violence. That's just written in our history. But how can we bridge that? How can we mend that and move forward where we no longer hear news stories of people suffering from, instances of murder, suicide, where we decrease the number of people reporting that they've experienced domestic violence.
I read an article from The Medium, and it's written by Star Lee. And a strong point she made, and I have here as quoted, as much as older generations leaves, we need to start new conversations with our sons fathers and uncles that are groomed to uphold culturally dense structures of toxic masculinity, transforming the narrative of what defines their manhood and the perception of what frames their identity. Because we see and we observe violence so much. As Emily said, it's ingrained into our history. And we see this through abusive international marriages, through barriers of leaving abusive relationships because the community doesn't support divorcee women, through the support of abusers and blind eyes turned towards violence. I know, Ari, you mentioned through bride napping, and one other topic that came up for me is very similar to that, and it's through abusive international marriages. It's when Hmong men, often older, leave out to, Laos or Thailand to marry younger women or girls, sometimes misinterpreting their circumstances. And these women can often face isolation, abuse, and exploitation in the US. And this, when I was doing research, actually reminded me of a story I could not find again on Nanjo Teng. I think way back when I listened to it, I might have talked to you about it. This was a couple years back. I remember the comments, so many of the women who had listened to it, and if you can find it, please post it in the comments, share it. Many of the women who did listen in and tune in were asking for Nanjo Teng to help her in reporting it, and that it should be reported because the case was just so horrifying, the story she shared. And so this, in short, the writer had shared with Nanjo Teng and her audience was a story of a girl who married a guy in the US, and she was from overseas. And she was subjected to prostitution against her will. She had no idea that that was what was going to happen. So he married her with her thinking she was going to be in a marriage. But he just brought her to the US to prostitute her. And she shared very, very intimate details of what had happened to her. And she was like, due to communication barriers, because she didn't understand the language here, isolation from others, including her own family, because she has no technology, she doesn't have phones, she doesn't have the internet, she can't even reach them. She's in a whole new country. And the lack of resources and funds, she was stuck. And she was like, it took forever for me to even find a way or whatever out. And I just kind of wallowed in it, thinking like, I have to just accept this as it is. And that was just such a heartbreaking, sad, and scary story in reality, which then brought me to thinking about all of the stories I hear about that they are lied to by, and this is alleged. I don't have specific sources, but if you do, again, please share, where young girls, they'll go out moshi and they're very young, like teenage years, and men from other, specifically like Shote, Layo, Nyo, Vietnam, will come and course them and lie to them that they're going to give them like opportunities, work opportunities, modeling opportunities, a path to stardom or whatever, and they'll leave with them only to find out that they're being prostituted. And some of the girls will somehow find their way back, but at that point, they become quote unquote damaged goods. And instead of, embracing our women and our children who have gone through these experiences to say like, hey, let's work through this together and let's rewrite this, let's help you, we instead shun them for the experiences that they never asked for the trauma that they never asked for, so that is something that I have here that I came across, and honestly, it's not something I've personally experienced, but much too often have heard about and hear from, whether it be close friends, families, or stories of others that I've potentially never met. So
Yeah, I think that just reminds me of Tangent, of the egg farm in Georgia, where they had advertised to these, I don't remember if it was Thai or Chinese women, that they could come work in the US, and they'd take care of their visas and stuff. And so they came, they took away their passports, took away any identifiable information, and essentially was trafficking them to use them to produce their eggs to be fertilized for IVF for other people. And the only reason why this was found out was because one of the women escaped and reported that. And so then the women got their passports back. And again, I don't remember if they're Thai or Chinese, but that's just another act of violence, right? They were falsely advertised that they're going to have a job and an opportunity in America just to be trafficked and used as like a human egg farm.
Wow, that's scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so goddamn scary because there are so many forms of abuse and violence out there. And I'm glad that we are talking about this and we are sharing these differing perspectives and also stories of violence. Because I think when I do have conversations outside of this, it's immediately everyone's thought comes to like, well, was she hit? Or, it's very physical. But having to understand that there's abuse that goes beyond just the physical. And I know that this is something that our elders struggle with, and being able to conceptualize that, if they're like, she looks fine, and it's like, it's more than that actually. And being able to have that kind of conversation to allow them to understand. But I don't know, it's just it's heartbreaking. It's hard to see, hard to hear and talk about, but it's definitely something that needs to be talked about. I know you guys already touched upon the why men feel it's the only option, right? Murder, suicide, or murder, or violence over divorcing. And I wanted to add to that it's definitely like the traditional Hmong clan structure, the patriarchal views that complicates the issues that we have within the community, which is also something that we touched base on earlier. And that the fact is Hmong women are always taught to be submissive. And we're always taught to be, we have to listen, have to oshinde, and we have to preserve our marriages in order to keep everything flowing. And that we get the blunt of the blow. We get shamed for the results as opposed to the people who are doing this act of violence getting the consequences that they deserve. And the sad part is that our clan leaders, if you are listening, often encourages it. Because if you don't encourage it, like how many times do we hear Murokbe Go Yik Go Sing? And it's like, what is Go Yik Sing doing that so many goddamn fucking Hmong women are getting killed out here? Like, did they not come to you? Or like, and it's because we have so many personal stories of women we know who come to you and your shit is Oshinde. Because if that's your advice, trust me and believe me, you can come to my house and I could say that too, and I'm gonna tell you don't believe in it. It's supposed to be the wisdom of our elders that we're supposed to shed upon to our younger generation to make them better. And if we go to this big old clan who's supposed to have all the thoughts and everything and they don't, there's no point of it. The point of you is to be there, to be a backbone, right? Isn't that what your mission and shit is and your values? It doesn't make sense to me. What I can speak to that is I do know that, again, personally, for me, when I was going through my divorce, one of my uncles was previously on the clan thing. And I truly appreciate him, okay? Because aside from my dad, my uncle was a huge part in my divorce because he had gone through this and he is a supporter of his daughters. And boy, can he say cutting words, which I truly appreciated too. Because it allowed for me to get that perspective on how big of a part our men can play if they choose to, in allowing us to rewrite this story. And I know that this is a very, very heavy topic. And it's definitely going to bring in very differing sites, perspectives within our community. But how I would want to close off on my end here is the comment section will definitely speak loud and clear on where we are regarding this issue. I think the contributors will tell us who has already developed a sense of where we truly what we need to work on, and who needs working on and who's already worked on that part of themselves and their views of the community in order to move forward, and advocating for our women, our victims. And I know for a fact there's going to be someone out there is like, well, and that's who I'm talking about. It's the fact that we're going to be looking at you. So
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have much to add. I think, in situations where among men feel the only option is murder-suicide, I think there's a lot of lack of empathy on both parts. There's a lot of lack of support. And better yet, there's obviously a lack of conflict resolution skills. Our patriarchy and their privilege in this culture supports that violence. And we've already talked about it, but I just want to say it again, that the family of the abused don't help because they don't want to upset the other family or the man. I saw this in real life. I see this in Children of the Mist, the documentary that I watched, and it's scary because respect is given more to the abuser than to the victims, right? Victims often have nowhere to go, but back to their abusers. And they are worried about perception rather than the person's safety. So it's also, and I was also thinking about this too, how if someone does run away, it's taboo in our culture too to allow a woman who isn't part of a man's family to live under his roof. So there are certain things put in place in our culture that really do make it harder for women to actually escape. And along with that, like, there is a really big theme in these cases of like, she didn't want to leave because she wanted a safe space. She wanted a safe face and the reputation. And I think it's really important to know that, like, when women do leave, they have no support, no safety net. And especially our older generation, like, they'll turn their backs on you. They'll just sever everything with you, or sever everything with you, which is horrible. But in the same, when I was thinking about this as well, I also thought about how when Hmong women marry, they no longer belong to their family. She now belongs to her husband's family. And we've seen it too, and I've seen it in a YouTuber's video that I was watching, but like, people think it's valid to go through with these types of abuse because they now own you. So I think from a very big picture as well, like, Hmong women, when you're married traditionally to a Hmong man, you can be seen as property, especially since they're paying for the dowry and they're technically paying for your head. So yeah, I just want to give that sort of context too for folks who are listening who aren't Hmong and who are like, oh, like, what other cultural things come into this whole, like, big picture. And then I think the other thing too that I wanted to bring up in terms of how we should move forward as a community is that I do think that we have to stop with the double standards. Like, I think a lot of times men can sometimes get a pass for things that women can't do. And it's something that needs to be talked about a lot more, because if we did and we changed that, men wouldn't be doing the things they'd be doing, to be honest. And for me, I found the ways that I support people is by being an ally. So by listening to people's stories, by being empathetic, by not judging folks, and understanding that when people are in difficult situations, you really just want to be empathetic and say, like, can we report this? Can we do something about it? Instead of pointing the finger and blaming people. I think it's also important to acknowledge when things need to be taken over by someone other than family, because I'd rather see someone in a different state than in a coffin. So, yeah.
So I want to close it out by just stating, what these two have said and what I've said, which is that there are multiple forms of violence. And I just want to add on to that. The last form of violence is what we do at the highest level, which is policy. So there's been a lot of policies put in place that keep women in situations of harm. I mentioned that a lot of women didn't get to have their own bank accounts until the 1950s, which kept them financially dependent on men, which again is another form of abuse. Women weren't allowed to vote for the longest time, and that is actually being threatened right now. So the House just passed the SAVE Act, which is essentially if your driver's license does not match your birth certificate, you will not be able to vote and register to vote. So what about the women who changed their last names to their husband's last name, which we know is a big cultural ask of women, is to take on their husband's last name. And so that can prevent a lot of women from being able to vote for policymakers who can affect their livelihood. It also affects many trans individuals, and it can affect people who are adopted because they don't have access to their birth certificates. Um, there obviously Roe v. Wade, that's been removed. Um, there have been removal of NIH funds, which does research for women and on women, especially cancer research on women and pregnancy complications for women. So when we say the acts of violence exist at all levels against women, it really does exist on all levels for women, because you don't see them passing policies that say men cannot have Viagra or that men cannot get gender affirming care, which is like when they go and do their hair implants, things like that. You will never see a bill like that that is passed for men. And so I think that where you are right now in your life, to start having this conversation with the people around you. And then if you can, and you have that ability to then bring that conversation forward to other avenues in which you feel would be effective. But overall, like our overall message is that if you are a victim of abuse, it is not your fault. You deserve to find a safe space. You deserve to have people in your corner. And if you don't feel that way, if you don't feel like you're safe, then this is us reaching out to you saying that you have every right to go and search for that. There are domestic women's shelters that you can contact. There are family violence advocates that you can contact. And again, we'll leave some information down in the description. But if you are a victim of abuse, it is not your fault. It's not your responsibility to fix it. And we hope that you're able to move forward, and that your abuser, this is my personal opinion, gets thrown in jail. So, yeah, I think that we could talk like for hours about this topic, but we're going to end it here. If you have your own story that you want to share, whether anonymously or you want to put in the comments, feel free to do so. If you want to share with us to share online, you can submit to your Dear Home Women web form. Otherwise, thanks for joining us for this conversation. Again, it was a pretty heavy conversation. I appreciate my co-hosts for sharing their perspectives and their personal stories. And I appreciate you for listening in this session today. If you haven't already, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube for additional videos coming up. Otherwise, you can find us on most social media platforms except for X. But thank you for joining us and have a great day.